Okay. I will say two things. One, want to send greetings from Dr. Terrence Mays, who was initially reached out to, who is traveling and busy and all over. And he sort of tapped me and said, Matt, I think you probably would like. I know Terrence was here at Irvine for a bit in the UC system, and we now have him at Stanford. And then I also, in my bio, it mentions that I worked at UC Office of the President for a while. While I was there, I worked on the creation and sort of getting the kickoff of the UC Council for Chief Diversity Officers, which none other than Doug Hayes was our first chair. So I worked with Doug quite a bit in my time at UC, and I've heard about sort of the thriving through that. So it was kind of when Terrence sent me this sort of opportunity to come and chat with you all. I was like, look at my world. I am going to try to keep it light. I'm going to try not to throw too much information at you all. I'm going to just try to, I see this as just sort of an opportunity to connect with my colleagues. I have a bit of an activity if we have time for it. I need to be done by 12:50.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, great. I'll just try to be done by then. So I'll try to give us enough time to do a quick little activity and let people have a merry Wednesday. So what I titled this is Cultivating Community and Collective Action within 4 staff. So as Joni mentioned, the team that I work on specifically focuses on staff-based issues. So what I want to do today is just really quick little agenda. I'll give you a little bit of background and just sort of try to do a little context setting. I want to explain Stanford is a very confusing place, so I'm going to just try to give like a quick little overview of our ecosystem. As someone I started my career in the UC system. I find Stanford to be even more confusing, so I think it'll be fine. I'll talk a little bit about our work as a staff JEDI team. I'm going to give you a couple examples around some efforts. We'll do a little activity. We got time for it. And then hopefully we can, make a good day of it. So those are the faces of the folks that I work with. Both Miranda and I do strategy and programs. So I focus a lot on like our programmatic efforts, and I do a lot of strategic planning and sort of action planning with folks. And Miranda does a lot of our like community cultivation. Shayla's our director, and then we are embedded in sort of a broader organizational effectiveness arm within the Stanford School of Medicine sort of branch, and Karen sort of leads sort of the sort of broader vision around organizational effectiveness. So a lot of my job is a lot of times is like internal consulting, and it's around sort of that strategic planning and sort of trying to build capacities within departments, units, leaders around sort of advancing JEDI efforts. You do not need to say anymore. Thank you for the lovely introduction. That's my face. I'm a proud Detroiter. Go Lions. It has been, I don't know if anybody is a fan. So it's hard to go.
Go Bears.
All right, that's fine. I know where I'm at. In higher ed and, sort of UC spaces and, so that's, I don't need to go into that. One thing that we leverage quite a bit in our work across the School of Medicine that I just wanted to bring into this space is from Adrienne Marie Brown, who sort of talks about emergent strategy core principles, which these are sort of the 9 principles to being able to enact change within an organization and in community. I will not read them to you because that is not a good use of your time. But sort of 2 things that stand out to me. So one, there's a conversation in a room that we only can have in this moment. You all are committing yourselves to sort of doing this work and sort of with a quarterly series. And so how do you sort of just want to honor that? And then, what you pay attention to grows. I'm going to talk about staff-based issues. A lot of times we lose a lot of times staff are lost out in the broader conversation. I heard a conversation about postdocs earlier, or somebody mentioning postdocs. Yeah, postdocs are staff. And in a lot of ways, our postdocs aren't some of our work, and I'll try to add a little bit of some of the work we've been doing with postdocs to sort of support them in their career trajectory. So the point is, what you pay attention to grows, sort of making sure you have a little bit of focus on sort of JEDI initiatives, but also focusing on staff. So that's kind of what I'll do today. This is just a just broader description that I wrote up, but it's really just saying that I'll be focusing on staff-based issues in our conversation. Again, I'm at the School of Medicine, so I'm both a university staff member and I also work and have projects within the broader Stanford medicine. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the Stanford ecosystem, which I'm not going to take any time away off of that. So there is a lot of times when people ask me, like, do you work for the university or do you work for the medical enterprise? I'm like, both. And I think so you all may actually understand this as, sort of for folks that work in academic medical. But there are three sort of components to when we talk about Stanford medicine. We're talking about obviously the School of Medicine, we're talking about children's, and we're talking about Stanford Healthcare. There are a number, I know it has sort of Tri-Valley partners and Tri-Valley and the partners, but there's also a number of clinics that are part of that. And so most of my work is really I'm positioned within the School of Medicine, but I have a number of projects that work in children's and in healthcare, and and so they're sort of a part of the broader family. I didn't put up the university chart because I think y'all know how the universities work. So when we talk about JEDI at Stanford Medicine, Joyce has been there for 2 years, almost 3, not 2 years. Joyce Sacchi is our Chief Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer. So she's really providing sort of broader sort of vision for, as I said, we're very decentralized, sort of a broader vision of all the different pockets and all the different things that are going on. As you could see in children's and in healthcare, they have sort of executive directors that lead. Leslie leads up children's work, and then Allison, this was is outdated, but Allison is now our executive director over at the adults hospitals. What you'll notice is in that center, it says School of Medicine Diversity Leaders Various. There is a lot of humans working on lots of things. Sorry, this is a little bit, it's easier to read on the computer screen, so I'll just sort of speak this out loud. Main thing to know is that there's sort of 6 different sort of constituency based. We have our Stanford medicine, we have our students, we have our faculty, we have enterprise, which Taryn sort of leads strategy for the dean on all equity strategy enterprise issues. We have graduate students, we have doctoral students, and then we also have staff. And so we are just sort of a part of a larger bucket of folks that are focusing on equity and staff-based things. The one caveat I would put here is that particularly for the students, for the graduate students, and for the those doc offices, they are sort of a full, they kind of do it all, right? So they're doing diversity, they're doing sort of inclusion work, they're doing culture work, but they're also doing sort of helping with hiring, and it's and our office is specifically around sort of extending justice, equity, diversity, inclusion work. And also we have a very large office of faculty development that is specifically focused toward around advancing JEDI. So I think So in terms of our work, I would just sort of put it into sort of 3 different buckets. We have various programs that we run. We do a lot of sort of community cultivation, and then we do a lot of self-advocacy. I only have 2 bullet points in there now, but there's a lot more of sort of folks that we work with, whether they be sort of disability communities. We have a number of work. Well, it's disability still, but it's working with a lot of like neurodiverse projects with staff folks. So those are sort of the 3 buckets, and I think we sort of talk about our work as being about community, capacity, and collective action. One thing I want to point out is that we have a thing called the SAC JEDI Collective, which is just wanted to share this because I think thinking about sort of the work of the department, I think this is a very specific example. Each department leader, we have 80 different representatives from across our different departments and units in the School of Medicine who one, come together and meet as a community, but two, sort of have worked and created resources and sort of information sharing. I think you all know that it can be very hard to get information out and to sort of collaborate and know what's going on. And so this team has really worked as sort of a way to do collective impact, but also to better inform and educate folks. With that, we 2 years ago published, and I want to share, I'll send these slides so you have them, but we have 15 resource guides that are all about better embedding JEDI practice in the employee experience. So we talk about how do we better support staff, and the focus goes from hiring, which I think we focus a lot on, rightfully so, around recruitment and getting folks in, but then it's really a question about what are people's experiences, right? So we have, the second thing is really about onboarding and sort of setting folks up for success. The third is around sort of interdepartmental navigating sort of the landscape. The fourth resource guide is around employee action, employee advancement and education. So how do you sort of invest in sort of the long-term growth of folks? And the final one is around transition and exit. So when people decide to leave, how are you supporting teams? How are you doing succession planning, right? That's a huge part of JEDI work, is actually making sure, as you have sort of these one-off initiatives that, or I shouldn't call them one-off initiatives, but too often they're one-off initiatives, and how do you sort of sustain efforts? So there's a bunch of different stuff in those guides. I just wanted to have that as a resource guide or as a reference. I'm going to start getting into some of our projects. It's around what time? Okay. There is a lot of things that are going on. These are the things in the white are not specifically on our team, but I thought was, since I know sort of ICTS's work, I wanted to at least offer and let you all know about. And again, there's more information on them. So Terrence is actually the executive director of our Commission of Justice and Equity. That report or that commission is specifically was designed after the murder of George Floyd to really sort of commit Stanford medicine in a real sizable way to justice, to anti-Black work, to all those things, right? And so in the commission, the main thing was to hire a chief equity, diversity, and inclusion officer. So we hired Joyce, just been with us for 2 years. And with that, she's initiating the Inclusive Excellence and Health Equity Strategic Plan. There's a number of different components to it. But some of it, one is really about sort of health equity. And so we've actually hired 2 chief health equity officers, one for the children's and one for adult hospitals, really thinking about how do we do a better job of sort of reducing inequities within healthcare. But also really thinking about sort of within the plan is also thinking about issues of culture, around bias planning, around sort of those sort of components. So that's really the big initiative within Stanford Medicine. Within the university, there is IDEAL, which is inclusion, diversity, equity, access, and learning. I don't know how I remember that. And that is, we did a very large climate survey, and there's a major report around sort of strategic planning. And so there's a full team dedicated to advancing those efforts. The REACH initiative is an initiative that is specifically focused on building pipeline and pathways. And so it's actually a part of the commission. And that is, we have an executive director working with HBCUs and MSIs. And we have sort of a fellowship with, I know there's a UC sort of HBCU partnership as well, but really the work is really focused on sort of building up sort of those pathways. So there's work around, since I heard postdocs, I'm just keep mentioning postdocs, was around sort of getting folks in the postdoc pipeline. So my colleague Judith Ned works directly with HBCUs to make sure they're applying to our postdoc opportunities, that they're applying to be in our labs, that they're applying to be, clinical researchers, right? To sort of be able to actually start to move in that pipeline. The final thing I just want to mention is We Ask Because We Care. It's a national initiative, but at Stanford, it's really about asking better questions so we can better take care, so we can, one, better know who are coming to our clinics, but also to better sort of create a culture of inclusion. And right now we're on phase 2, which is around sexual identity and orientation. So really trying to change the culture there. One thing I'll point out is the red is sort of our team's work. Not going to go into all the details, but I will say for you all's purposes, the research community of support. One of the big issues that we had that came out of the IDEAL survey was that research staff felt unsupported, had really challenging relationships. A lot of folks had really challenging relationships with their PIs. Power imbalance with their PIs. And people felt like there was I don't call it a glass ceiling, but there was no room for growth. And so the research community support, specifically out of our team, that's a project or an initiative that Miranda leads, my colleague, and it is specifically around changing that culture. One is to obviously community for support with them, but really getting folks like the skills to start thinking about career planning, because in a lot of the research space, people aren't having those career conversations with folks. And disproportionately, I would say folks of color are not getting those resources and having those conversations. So that's a little bit about, I'm just throwing words at you all, but that's a little bit about sort of some of the work of our team. I am going to just point out 2 other things, and I'm going to get into the activity, and I'll pause for a little bit for any questions and get into the activity. I'm going to do really quickly here. We have an inclusive discussion leadership series that is really working with leaders on the work of inclusive leadership and how we can better embed it as a leader within Stanford. So we're actually working through all the dean's direct reports and all the people that report to those direct reports to be a part of these series. We are 4 cohorts in, and we have really great results. But I don't want to rest too much there, because I do want to make sure, as this is sort of a Black thriving conversation, want to talk to you all a little bit about an initiative we did, or initiative that is really ongoing around supporting Black staff. So in the IDEAL report, like many culture climate surveys, Black staff sort of talked, staff, I guess I should disaggregate that, staff and then Black folks talked, sort of disproportionately about feeling more isolated, right? So like staff talked about, having really hard challenges with their supervisors, or to be a staff member can be kind of difficult, but to be a Black staff member can be really difficult, because you're sort of experiencing both of those things. And so one of the things we really wanted to do, especially since our team focuses specifically on staff work, is trying to sort of move the needle a little bit on, obviously there are resources and things, but really trying to have a full conversation, cultivate a true conversation about, one, how do we build a better community? How do we build a strong community? And so we did this activity. Well, we did a number of listening tours and did this larger thing for Juneteenth. And we did a number of different activities, and it was sort of like very interactive. And we did a virtual one and an in-person one. But what the consultant had us do was this thing called water, plant, and compost. Right. So really thinking about this idea of, what do you want to water? What is working well in your communities? What do you need to plant more of? What do we need to build? What structures do we need to build to actually be able to have to build stronger connections in communities? And 3, and I love this idea of compost. I think so often we talk about the new things we need to build, and not talk about what do we need to do to make room for, you can't just keep building, And so how do we, by composting, it's not just throwing it in the trash. You are making it by discharging of it, if you will. You're making room for something new, and something new to be able to cultivate. So I won't read through the bullet points, but those were sort of the broader points of what folks experienced. The other thing I would say before we get into activity is, from those conversations, really, we have a new work group on retention and advancement out of our office that is specifically working on this idea of pipeline and mentorship for Black staff, but more broadly for minoritized staff. And that is a direct result of these conversations. And the dean is very excited about it. And we have our next work group meeting next week, actually. So when I leave here, I gotta work. We gotta send some stuff off. So I want to. What I thought would be kind of fun, as you all are. I know you're in ICTS, but I think you also have a broader sort of experience within sort of the broader Irvine community. Is for us to have that same conversation, to be able to say, for us to, would like for you all to like have some time together to chat with people near you, or I don't know how. Oh yeah. I've been to pause and then I kept talking. Please.
Thank you. So I think one of the key issues is you've got all these really interesting programs. Mm-hmm. How do you know you succeeded? I mean, these are complicated questions, right? Like the feeling of the staff, the feeling of the Black staff.
Sure.
How do you know when you've really done the right activity? How do we quantify it? Is it all possible? And Jeremy made us do that with this endeavor. Like we at least set some metrics up when we established this. It's simple things, number of speakers, a few other things that we could put some numbers on. How do you do it at an organizational level?
Sure. So what I actually told you is that we're coming out with an impact report at the end of the year, where that's sort of our main thing. I mean, I think the question around assessment is, or like, metrics, is one that you're always sort of thinking about in DEI and JEDI work, right? And so I think from one standpoint, you can always, I think our team is really invested in, program assessment, right? So really thinking about the folks that are, because, when you talk about sort of the broader change, because there's thousands and thousands of people within the Stanford medicine sort of ecosystem, we're not going to touch all those people. But what we can do is talk about, we can sort of assess and understand the change or sort of what is coming from the folks that are in our program. So we do a lot of sort of program assessment. The other thing I would say is that we have a workforce development or workforce analytics team that is new. That's a part of the broader organizational effectiveness team. And we're really working, to be very honest, we're kind of behind in terms of accessible data. Like that's been the hardest thing. When I worked for UC, I felt like I had access to so much internal data, and it's really hard to get that. So we're really working on, one, getting more access to data, and two, being able to build out actually specific metrics. So specifically within JEDI work, you really want to think about employee experience data, right? So like, this is going back to my UC experience, whatever the survey that they do every 2 years, can't remember the name of it. There's actually specific questions around sort of experiences of belongingness, experiences of, right? And so that is a way to actually be able to track, are you going in the right direction? But a huge part of that is actually being able to build out the infrastructure, which a lot of institutions don't have. And quite honestly, we're building, right? And then I think in terms of this other broader point around sort of metrics is qualifying, is like all of our programs and our efforts have specific metrics in place, right? So we are looking really closely at so I mentioned the advancement and retention sort of piece. We're looking really closely, part of that project is looking really closely at internal mobility for minoritized staff, and thinking about sort of what are the pathways that people are getting in and out. Because we've done a lot of work on recruitment. There's a ton of data about recruitment, but not very much so on how people get moved. Exactly, right? So that's actually one of the things we're working really closely on is that internal mobility.
Can I ask another?
Please.
So there's a lot of challenge now to the whole DEI.
Sure.
I mean, you have got to be
aware.
Yeah. And a lot of the argument is economic. People say, we are spending X amount of dollars on this. Is there thought, and I imagine there would be, in attempting to quantify the benefit of achieving the goals? There, almost nothing doesn't have an economic you know, people who are unhappy don't work as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People who don't advance to the level of their talent are not gonna be as productive. And I'm just wondering if maybe with the schools of business or something like that, or we take the team science model where they were able to demonstrate that teams in
Diverse
science,
teams. Oh, sorry.
well, in general, teams that learn how to work together produce more stuff.
Mhm.
Is this something that's emerging in the field at all?
Well, I mean, for a really long time, you know, and that's a part of some of the stuff that I did in my PhD is, you know, for a long time, I think there's diverse teams create better results. Like that is just, I mean, that's out of business schools, right? That's an empirical, true empirical understanding. So I think that really has been the crux of it. I mean, I think in terms of thinking about ROI, right? Specifically because I do work in sort of, work really closely in HR, is really thinking about one of our sort of conversations in terms of our benefit is, I mean, you would be paying a lot more for McKinsey to come in than you pay me. And they pay me all right. You know, they've been paying me a lot more, right?
I mean, again, the criticism seems to be always financial.
Yeah.
So it would seem to me that a response should also, you can't monetize it.
Yeah, exactly.
But to some degree, it would seem to me that some creative thinking about this might be useful. I'm just trying.
No. And I think it's a good point around, you know, I think that it's important to in JEDI and DEI work is to one hold sort of the sort of general broader like moral obligation of what it means to create more equitable and fair systems, but also the very practical thing that like this is actually a return on investment. This actually makes us work better. This makes us work smarter. This makes us be able to do more functional things. Like, you know, and I think that work happens, but I think it happens in silos, and that is, you know, yeah, and I think that that's more work that, you know, I think inevitably needs to happen more. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question. So this is a little bit of a tack on to what Dan was saying. So I mean, we've seen, right, like it had what happened, the murder of George Floyd, right? And so we saw this proliferation across like academic units and also in the industry and kind of commercial space, right? Around like hiring staff to do this, right? And so I'm looking at the proliferation at Stanford, and then we move kind of like 4 or 5 years into the future, right? And so you see this fatigue thing kind of happening. Like we're tired of talking about diversity a lot, right? Like again, people don't necessarily see the return on investment. So how do you all post like this kind of expansion? How do you all kind of push against the fatigue portion, right? And make sure that you're continuing to do the thing you talked about with like is the planting and the composting.
Mm-hmm. How you move past the fatigue. I mean, the fatigue really is there, and I think that that's like we have a new president coming in, and I think with changes in leadership, there's always sort of antsiness around, you know, where priorities change and move. I think in terms of, I mean, I think an important thing for when I talk about sort of the work with the Staff JEDI Collective, very few, and also the work that we're doing with inclusive leadership, you know, very few of the folks that sort of in the program and stuff we talk about actually have diversity in their title, right? So it's really, I think, a part of the focus has to be that like this work is shared, right? And so it's not just about it's shared, and that it's an expectation that like it is a part of your work. Like I think a lot of times people feel like this is a compliment or an auxiliary or something that is you know, worked really closely with our inclusive our talent acquisition team to really that it's less of a, oh, what is this? You know, how am I making this process longer? But really about like, how are you actually fundamentally changing the process so it actually includes these things? So it just, you know, is a reframing of it. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think that like, I think the fatigue is real. I think there is a tax, and there's I think that there is, yeah, I think there is a fatigue, but I think that it is what we need to do is also recognize that there is this expectation, it should not be going away. Because the same energy that folks had in 2020 or 2021 it's, not every conversation needs to be a conversation about oppression, right? Like nobody's saying that, but how do you all, there should be mechanisms in place where it's less of a added on thing that we're doing, but now is embedded in in how we do our work, which is sort of the point of the resource guides. It's not about like, how can you tag on, how can you have this extra conversation, but like, what does it actually look like for it to be a part of your work? So it's not about being fatigued by it, but it's just sort of integrated within everything.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Not necessarily new to the activity, but I just figured you probably would get tired of hearing my voice.
No, please.
Okay. Yeah, and I was thinking this could be pretty quick. So if folks want to, I don't know how it can work on the Zoom room if you want to do some, or even, I guess folks on Zoom, I didn't realize we were going to be on Zoom. So we were just either you can type by yourself, or I don't know if there's a way to do.
No, I think we'll let the Zoomers chat amongst themselves.
Yeah,
Exactly. Oh, okay, perfect.
This is the elite.
Yeah. So what I was thinking, was we can, if folks want to turn to folks next to them before we sort of have a larger conversation, but any reactions to these questions, right? When you think about sort of the idea of building stronger networks, relationships, opportunity for Black staff and folks in the Black community, what are some water opportunities, things that are working? What are some structures and things to build better? And then what are some things that maybe need to be composted? And it doesn't need to be a serious conversation, just, off the top of your head. So I'll give you all some time to chat and then we can come back together and I'll get out of here. Talk to each other.
I'll be friends. Well, I have things to say because
Okay, so water.
we just had.
I feel like we do. I feel like we really term work. Yeah.
Which is
We're the elite. Yeah, what do you think that we do, say in the ER, School of Medicine, or the ITCS in general, and we feel like it's working?
Because we really have something in our strategic plan about wanting to increase diversity of our mental health, our Ks and Ts, but nothing. So I think that's really interesting that they're working on this because I don't know what it is.
Concrete things.
Well, I think
Diversity supplement.
Back, I'm gonna be real. Invite us to come on back. I'll send these slides. Our emails are in there if you want to reach out. Please do. Would love to hear maybe one or two people from just your conversation, and then I'll hand it back over. Is there any interesting nuggets that came up in your discussions?
I'll start. So Joni, Lisa, and I are all on a little workforce, and we just talked about a lot of this stuff, so I'm already thinking about it. But I think something we need to build here and is a better roadmap of what's available on campus and what's occurring and where it is. Because, for example, we've had instances where we offered something and then we got reprimanded by the Office of Inclusive Excellence because they were planning to do something similar around the same time. And, the point is we need to be communicating and those channels are not there.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a thing that happens a lot. I think at Stanford it's welcome for people, everybody has their own thing, but then there's no synergy. And so it's, I feel like, yeah. So, and as someone who worked at the Office of President, it was really a big thing around channels, right? Like, how do you can have specific conversations, but let's not make it harder than it needs to be. How do we support each other in those things? So that's for certain. I see a hand. Oh no, sorry.
Joni has a lot to say.
Okay.
Well, the part that I think I feel like we don't get to, because I love the idea of like the water plant compost. I feel like we don't do a lot of composting in this, and that's just because people come up with initiatives, it's their baby, right? Like, just admit it's an academic setting and it's their thing. And to the point around like metrics and outcomes, right? We were having this conversation, it's like, why you need to measure whether or not something is valuable and if it's working in the population that you seek it to work in. And if it's not, then it might need to die or become something else. And that becomes a very difficult conversation in a lot of circles to admit that an initiative that you came up with didn't work out the way you thought, right? Or doesn't have the outcomes that you thought. So, right, so like kind of, I think we need to create a culture and an atmosphere where that like the composting idea like really is something that we're pushing, because I don't think that happens.
Yeah, no, totally. My one of my mentors that works at OP, I'm totally gonna butcher it, but it's this idea like, are you measuring the right thing? So like, are you, when you talk about doing metrics, you know, and you say, oh my goodness, this is so effective. Are you the metrics, or you know, your results could really just be measuring the specific thing that you're doing as opposed to the actual change that you're trying to make, right? And so the focus really has to be on the change that you're trying to make and not just the thing that you're doing. Because, you know, the thing that you're doing may be good, but, and I think that's where, when I was kind of ear hustling to you all about, I think that's really where data, like workforce analytics, where you're really thinking about the broader landscape of you know, what do retention numbers look like? What does the employee experience stuff happen? Where are we with internal mobility, right? Like, I think those are important things and things to check out. So I will send these slides to folks. Please stay in touch. You know where to find me. Actually, so I live in LA, so I'm a remote place. So I go up to Stanford when I need to, but I live in Los Angeles, so I'm not too far away.
Travel far.
Yeah, I know. It was
across the orange curtain.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually kind of nice. Listen to a couple podcasts. It's a nice little
Coffee with the border now.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, thanks so much for having me, and I'll stick around for a little bit. I don't know if you all want to wrap up the meeting.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing it. Like I said, I think it's really, I think it's really valuable for us to hear about what a lot of our peer institutions are doing, right? As far as their infrastructure, their structure, how they're hiring, how they're thinking about it. Like I said, like the workforce analytics things, I was like, I never thought about that, but that's a really great idea. So, you know, for our 7 years, our next grant, right? You know, maybe we'll have a workforce analytics section. But yeah, I just thank you so much for your time, right? And being able to share with us and also give us some ideas and some things to cultivate and think about. So.
Thanks.